So, good evening. This morning I was speaking about how we can approach Holy Week as a religious experience, and I would advise you not to do what I proceeded to do this afternoon, which was to begin Holy Week by putting a hole in my head, which you may or may not notice. But it was actually a punishment on me because somebody staying in our house was telling me that they were hitting their head on a low ceiling, or a low doorway. So I said, that's rather stupid, if you keep on doing it. I turned around to go into another room through a low doorway to get something to hang over his doorway. Proceeded to knock myself out. So that puts that. There was a film, wasn't there a film in which the actor, he's a detective, spends the whole movie with a band-aid on his face? Do you remember that? Anyway, so I'm sorry you'll have to look at this hole in my head for the next week, but hopefully it will get less offensive. One of the ways in which we enter into the full meaning of Holy Week is through Scripture, and of course we'll also be entering into it through the liturgy and of course through our times of meditation. And I'd like to, in these some of these sessions anyway, look at some of the scriptures that make Holy Week significant for us, but to do so by really focusing on one detail in different parts of the scriptures, and try to explore what that image or that symbol might mean for us in terms of our own journey and our own experience of holiness. And I thought we could begin where the Gospel today actually begins. The Passion narrative begins with the story of Jesus visiting the house of Simon the leper in Bethany. Bethany was a small town whose exact position is still a little uncertain for the archaeologists, but probably within a few miles of Jerusalem. And it's an important little town in the Gospel stories because Jesus clearly had some friends there, Martha and Mary and their brother Lazarus. It was in Bethany that he raises Lazarus from the tomb. It was there that he meets with Martha and Mary and has his conversation with them about Martha's distractedness. So Bethany is an important symbolic town, presumably because it was a place where he had friends and felt at home, felt he could relax, and felt he could be at peace. In Bethany, on this occasion, he was in the house of Simon the leper, which doesn't sound like a very nice nickname to have, but Simon the leper, perhaps because he had been a leper and had been cured, and perhaps he'd been seen as a leper for a long time and had been healed and was able to be rehabilitated into the community. We don't know, but that's the name he has. And we're told that he was at dinner when a woman, this is in the Gospel of Mark, we see the same story in the Gospel of John and references to the same event in the other Gospels, but with variations. Most of the Gospels give a slightly different angle on many of these familiar stories. Just as if you ask a group of people to describe the same event, they're not going to use exactly the same words or remember it in exactly the same way, and they're going to want to bring out something in particular through their recounting of the story. So I think these discrepancies between the different gospel narratives are a sign of authenticity Anyway, he's at dinner in the Gospel of Mark when a woman comes in with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment, pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the ointment on his head. And then in the Gospel of Mark, we're told that some of the people around him complained about this extravagance. And he defends this woman. "Leave her alone," he says. "Why are you upsetting her? What she has done for me is one of the good works. The poor you will have always with you. I will not always be with you. And wherever throughout the world the good news is proclaimed, what she has done will be told also in remembrance of her." In the Gospel of John, we're given a little more detail and the story is a little more fleshed out. We're told that the woman is Mary, Mary of Bethany, presumably the same Mary, the sister of Martha. Mary who was the contemplative, you remember in the story of Martha and Mary. Martha comes out of the house to greet him, then she becomes distracted by her many tasks. She becomes stressed out and comes and complains to Jesus that Mary is just sitting at his feet, listening to his words and being useless. And in that story, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus defends Mary. She has chosen the better part, he says, and it will not be taken away from her. And this defense of the contemplative life has echoed down the centuries in the life of the Church. So presumably this is, in the Gospel of John, the same Mary who comes and pours 12 ounces or a significant amount of this very costly perfumed ointment. Except in the Gospel of John, she pours it on his feet and wipes his feet with her hair. So different variations on the same story. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And that's the image I'd like you to think about. That ointment being released on him, on his head or on his feet or both, and the house being filled with the fragrance of this perfume. In the Gospel of John then it's Judas who complains about the extravagance, and Judas who says, you could have sold that ointment on eBay and got 300 denarii for it, and now it's just been thrown away. The money could have been given to the poor. And we're told by the scholars that that amount of pure nard or spikenard might have been worth 1 year's salary, or an average salary. It was extremely valuable. It's almost like perhaps someone taking a Mercedes-Benz and, giving it away or driving it over a cliff or something. It was a very expensive herb or spice. It came from India, and it's still used less frequently, I think, but still used in many Tibetan healing incenses. And it's used in the Tibetan medical system, I'm told, especially for the healing of deep-seated grief or pain. And also as a palliative care for those who are dying, as a way of easing their pain and suffering. So the substance here that we're talking about was well known. It had many properties. It was very valuable financially, but it was orientated towards the well-being of people, for the healing and the easing of their pain. And so Mary, who comes and uses this the whole of this ointment, when it's said that she breaks the jar, don't think it means that she broke it on his head, but presumably, and if she just broke it, it could have gone all over the floor, so maybe it just means that she broke the seal on the jar and was able to pour the ointment in a more mindful and caring way, and maybe anointing him, or rubbing this purifying and soothing ointment into his body. And of course this act was seen as a kind of pre-anointing of his body in preparation for the ordeal that he was about to undergo. Because it was also from Bethany that he began his entry into Jerusalem, which we remembered and reenacted at the liturgy this morning with the palms. And one more sort of historical detail that I think helps us to get into the meaning of this story. Bethany, as I say, we don't know exactly where it was. It was near Jerusalem, and sufficiently outside of Jerusalem to be a place where the unclean, like lepers, or the sick, were able to be cared for. So Bethany was associated, in some accounts anyway, as a place of healing, a place where the sick, or the marginal, or the rejected could be looked after carefully and legally. It was here also, of course, that Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and it was here also that Jesus goes before the ascension, after the resurrection. So this little village, whatever it was, is a place of great significance. And if you just think of the places in your own life, Bere Island for me, for example, but and maybe for some of you, but places in your own life which have a significance just because of the place it is, and of the memories or the associations or the connections that you have had there, or your family or have had there. Jane Austen once said that you don't love a place any the less because you've suffered in it. So there are places where we feel deeply connected, deeply rooted, and places where we can be in touch with the deeper levels of meaning in our life over a significant period of time. So not just a place where we had a good holiday once, but I've been there, done that, don't have to go back there again, but a place where our roots have really gone down and where we feel connected to something deeper than our surface rush of life. So, what does this dramatic but rather quiet act, because again Mary doesn't speak, just as she doesn't speak in the story of her and her sister Martha, what does this silent but quite dramatic act of pouring this precious ointment onto Jesus mean? And what does it mean to us? What does it tell us about our own relationship to Jesus and the relationship that we have to our own destiny, to our own spiritual journey? Throughout the scriptures of Holy Week, we see the destiny of Jesus becoming, reaching a climax, becoming more and more evident. And the Gospel writers describe this destiny in terms of a fulfillment of prophecy. That they looked at the earlier scriptures of their tradition to explain and illustrate the meaning of what they saw happening but could not understand just as we cannot still fully understand it in these great events of the last days of Jesus' life. So, how does this detail in the scriptures speak to us about our own sense of meaning and our own destiny, our own spiritual practice? Well, first of all, perhaps we see Jesus defending Mary again, just as he defended her earlier against the impatience and the anger of her sister, Martha. Tell her to come and give me a hand. She's sitting there being selfish and doing nothing. Now he defends her against others in the group who complained that she had been wasteful with this precious commodity. Leave her alone. Leave her alone. Because, and why are you upsetting her? If Mary is a symbol of the contemplative dimension of our lives, not just of people with a particular contemplative vocation, living in a remote place, living in a monastery or a hermitage, but if she's a symbol of the contemplative dimension of my life and your life and everyone's life, then perhaps what we're seeing here is Jesus affirming the importance of that dimension. And there is another part of us that complains about this, that says it's a waste of time, that we're not getting much out of these times of meditation or our spiritual practice. We're not getting what we want. We're putting so much time or effort into it, and we're not earning as much interest on it as we should be. There are times when we feel that. We may not feel that all the time, but when that mood is on us, that moment, that period of discouragement, the early Desert Fathers and Mothers used to call it Achadia, a feeling of discouragement with our spiritual practice, impatience, a feeling that we have lost it in some way, that maybe we're doing it wrong, maybe there's another technique we could use, another method we could get which would speed up the process. We're impatient for quicker results, and the discipline at times does become, like in anything, like learning a language or learning an academic subject, there are times when discipline itself becomes tedious and irritating. So there's part of us that just resents it and reacts against it. So perhaps this is how one way we can read this part of the story, that the contemplative dimension of ourselves needs at times just to be left alone, not evaluated, not judged, and that the part of our mind that wants to make sense of it, wants to justify it, just has to be told, go away, leave it alone, and don't upset this contemplative dimension, this contemplative orientation. Leave it be. And I think in a way that's what happens as we move into a serious practice of meditation in daily life. That's what I hope we're all aiming for. If you just meditate as sort of binge meditators, you do a couple of 2 or 3 days or a week of 16 hours a day, and then you come out feeling a little spacey, and a little angelic, or a little enlightened, and then it all begins to wear off quite quickly. That's one approach, but maybe a more effective approach is the moderate practice. John Main used to say the 2 times of meditation are a minimum for a serious practice, but also they are a serious practice. It will bring about deep and sustained change in you, but it needs to be regular. So if we're going to be, if we're developing that daily practice, there are times where we just have to say, just leave it alone, just do it. Don't examine it, don't analyze it, and don't evaluate it. And don't worry about it whether it's a waste of time or whether you could use the time better. Just leave it alone, and don't upset yourself about trying to justify it. And that's something I think that we have to learn. We learn it through our own experience. We learn it through the wisdom of the tradition that we're meditating in. We learn it through sharing this journey with other people, whether it's in a weekly group or on a time of retreat, when we see and feel other people's experience, and their experience can inform ours and teach us. We learn this, I think, quite naturally, but it needs support. We don't learn it in a week, we don't learn it in a month, and we're always learning it in a sense. But when we do learn it, and the discipline of that contemplative practice, the daily meditation, just then becomes natural. It becomes the kind of practice that the regular meditator will say, my day is not complete if I don't do it. They're not saying, I had a great meditation this morning. Whether they had a great meditation or a totally distracted meditation, it doesn't really matter. They don't have to upset themselves about having to evaluate it. So we see Jesus defending the contemplative life, the contemplative aspect of our lives, I think in a way that instructs us on the right attitude we should be adopting and the right attitude we should be being trained in. And in any serious spiritual practice, our attitude is all important. It's not just doing it, it's the attitude and the motivation behind it. That's what really matters. Jesus constantly points to the heart as the place of authenticity, where the authenticity of what we're doing is tested. It's what comes out of the heart rather than just the external observance or the external action that matters. And similarly, this defense of the contemplative practice, that it is authentic in itself, makes us realize that we don't and should not apply the same standards or the same criteria of evaluation to our spiritual life as we apply to other aspects of our lives. In other words, you can't measure it. You can't say that it's cost effective. I mean, a lot of ways in which meditation is taught today, of course, is quite useful up to a certain point, but only up to a certain point. It will say meditation is good for you psychologically and physically, and the time you spend in meditation will bring you benefits, and you will save money on medication. Will save time spent at the doctor or the therapist, and all these benefits will be would more than justify the amount of time and effort that you give to your daily meditation. And a lot of people are very comfortable with that because it's measurable and it's scientific, and We all like to be told that what we're doing is scientifically approved. And as I say, up to a point, that's a perfectly valid way to start. It's not how we start to present it or teach it, or any spiritual tradition doesn't start from that point, but it, of course, should recognize that these benefits exist, and they're a good reason to meditate, but they're not the deepest or the primary reasons. So what it means is that we approach our meditation, as John Main advised us, without expectations or demands. And that's a completely different approach from being told you should meditate because you're going to lower your cholesterol, improve your blood pressure, reduce your stress, and improve your sleeping patterns, and so on. What we're told from the spiritual tradition is we don't need to justify it in that way. As I say, it doesn't mean you're not aware of the benefits, the side effects, but you don't have to justify it in that way. You don't have to say that it's cost effective. And if you think of the difference between those two approaches, you see the difference between the two dimensions of ourselves, of our lives, between the contemplative and the active. And if we are doing anything in life with that attitude, from that depth of motivation, then it is going to have a transforming influence on our whole life. This is the level, this is the depth at which we make our deepest commitments in life to other people, to those we love, to those with whom we commit our lives, whether in marriage or family or community. This is the level of faith, because this is about faith. This is the level where we are faithful to something that we commit ourselves to. And whenever we commit ourselves in faith to something, we are initiating a deep process of integration. It is faith that heals us. Over and over again in the Gospels, Jesus says to people he's healed, I'm not doing magic, I'm not a wonder worker. He says, it is your faith that has healed you. Your faith has healed you. So this attitude, if you like, this contemplative orientation, which you cannot measure in terms of dollars and cents, or in cost effectiveness in other ways, or that you don't measure just in terms of the benefits it brings you. Okay? So that level of motivation, Father John says, meditate without demands or expectations, that's what opens up this tremendous energy of faith. The faith that moves mountains. The faith that heals. The faith that allows you to stay rooted, committed, engaged to what you have committed yourself to, a person or a cause or a community or a work or a path in life, through ups and downs, through good times and bad times. And it's that which really is the measure of the person. At the end of our life, this is how we will be judged. How we will judge ourselves, in fact.